The major painter in Spain for the Romantic period and the period of the Enlightenment is Francisco de Goya. He is court painter for the King of Spain, and he is also a master printmaker. Today, he is known as much for his prints as for his paintings. And digging into Goya is worth doing. So, first off, this is The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters. This is an etching, an aquatint. Aquatint was at the time a fairly new method, and Goya is one of the great innovators of aquatint. So the grainy quality that is in this print, see the texture up close, comes from dusting the plate selectively with a resin and then submerging that resin dusted plate into an acid bath, which etches or eats the metal in the pattern that you have dusted onto it. And of course, these lines are scratched in with dry point in traditional etching fashion. So you've got a man here reading and writing, reasonable things to do, activity of the mind, and when reason falls asleep, hobgoblins and creatures of the night come out. This is one of two sets of prints, The Disasters of War, and this is from Los Capricios, loosely translated The Follies of Man. And these were sold literally under the counter at shops around Spain because they were illegal. They are anti authority, they are anti government, anti abuses of power. And in Spain, the church is particularly powerful politically. The Spanish Inquisition is, of course, during this time and both before and after. Goya himself is called before the Spanish Inquisition to answer for one of his paintings. So he is a painter who is kind of one of the grandfathers of modernism in the way that he approaches his subject matter and what he decides to focus his art on. He is all about truth with a capital T, even if that truth is horrifically ugly. Whereas a lot of other painters were about the search of beauty, that sort of thing, idealized beauty, Goya is not that. He's definitely his own guy. So you can classify him as a romantic painter, but he is much more than that, and of course, a master printmaker. This is a look at Los Capricios and Disasters of War. Both of those kind of jammed into one Google search here. And it shows bloodshed. It shows the dismemberment of citizens. There is a priest holding a crucifix and choked to death and tied to a post in public. These are horrific scenes. They are scenes of discord, scenes of horror. Of course, that is a small print on paper, something that you could take to your house with you. This is scrolling down, opened up more than I bargained for. The aftermath of a battle in which you have dismembered bodies impaled on trees, with soldiers fighting in the distance or lounging about. So Goya wants to show the ugly reality rather than an idealized form of beauty. And this is a classic image from Disasters of War. You have a man hung by his neck from a tree, further humiliated by having his pants pulled down around his ankles, and an officer looking pretty pleased with his work. Not the kind of message that the authorities, the military, so on and so forth, the government would like to have out there. So these were Goya's paintings, I'm sorry, his etchings, that were done for actual individual people rather than for the aristocracy and the king and the royals. This is the kind of work that Goya did for the royals. It's a family portrait, it is his day job. And he is kind of borrowing a little bit from the other great Spanish painter, Velázquez. Here you have the back of one of Goya's very large canvases. Goya is looking out at you, at the audience, presumably at the king. And art critics have pointed out that the king does not look too regal or wise. The queen does not look too elegant. This lady looks kind of horrific here. Somehow Goya manages to keep his job, even though he does not flatter anyone at all. So his job is to paint the royals. He does that, uh, but not in a flattering way in which we see from other royal portrait painters. The king reportedly likes Goya a lot, considers him a friend. I'm not sure that Goya felt the same way. And one art critic has said that this looks like the corner butcher and his wife who have won the lottery rather than a traditional royal portrait. And when he paints Picture of a Child, this is the little prince, the son of the king who is in the middle of the last portrait we looked at. What ordinarily would be a painting of childhood innocence, you have a boy with a pet bird on a string, is turned into something darker because you've got these cats that are here waiting to pounce, and you can be assured that as soon as the child turns away, the cats are going to pounce on the bird. And the bird has something in his mouth, a little card with an etching, and what does it say on it but Goya? So that is the artist's signature there, as if all this intrigue and deception and violence is just simmering under the surface. Even with a portrait of childhood innocence, Goya adds a darker layer because that's what he perceives in life around him. And here is his executions on the 3rd of May. So the French troops invade Spain. Of course, they share a border. And these are French troops. These are Spanish villagers who were protesting, rebelling, not fans of the invasion, to put it shortly. And you can see this figure almost in the center, illuminated by kind of a weird lantern here. He is wearing yellow and white. His arms are up in almost a crucifixion pose. You can see the pleading faces of the victims. You can see what that gets them. And then the soldiers are nameless, faceless. They're just a row of rifles and bayonets and uniforms. And you clearly get an image of the powerful versus the powerless. With Goya, there is never any doubt as to who you should sympathize with. He really puts a fine point on that. And his subject matter in general is power, the abuses of power, and that absolute power corrupts absolutely. So that is Executions on the 3rd of May. If you have to pick one Goya painting, this is often the one that books choose. And then his black paintings. So Goya has a long life and a long career as a painter. And let me get rid of that. He undergoes a long illness. He kind of retires to his home, and then he works on paintings just for himself. And he paints these directly onto the wall of his home. They're called the black paintings both for the dark colors that are there, a lot of black, and also for the subject matter. It's incredibly dark, even for Goya. This is Saturn devouring his children. I'll pull up the Wikipedia page for black paintings here. So that is the most famous. This is the full image. And you have Saturn, alternately Kronos, depending on the version of the story. And he's one of the Titans, one of the kings of the gods early on. And they received word that their children would overthrow them. So Saturn, in this case, learns that his children will grow up to be more powerful and take over his power. So he does the reasonable thing. He eats them, right? What you or I would do. So this is Saturn, and he is devouring one of his grown children. Although he does not look like he's in charge, right? He doesn't look like he is one of the most powerful beings in the universe. His eyes look haunted and hunted, much like the victims with Executions on the 3rd of May. So power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. The people who are on top will do absolutely anything in order to maintain that control and that authority and that power. And that is really the lesson and the main subject matter of the entirety of Goya's body of work. This was painted in his house on the wall of his dining room, right? Kind of appropriately. And it's the most kind of gruesome, the most gripping, the most well known of the black paintings. And then we'll look at a couple more. This is Fight with Cudgels. You have two giants, apparently, and they are sunk up to their knees in the earth itself. They are beating each other with sticks. They are at close range, and who do you think is going to win this fight? Probably neither of them, because each one will use his last breath to beat the other one to death. So there seems to be very little hope of escape. This is man's inhumanity to man, which is kind of one of the big subjects for Goya. He is, again, no optimist as far as human nature goes. This is warfare, this is fighting. There is no positive outcome from that. And then Opero, the dog. This could have been painted yesterday, and it would seem as fresh as when Goya painted it. So you have just a portrait of fear. There's the head of a dog up close. You can tell from its body language, from its ears, from its eyes that it's fearful. It's looking up at something. And what is there to see but just darkness, right? Just sort of a shadow that's there, sort of a fog. And this is the fear of the unknown, right? Just like in old 50s horror movies, black and white horror movies like The Blob, you don't really see the creature for most of the movie, which makes it more fearsome because you don't know what you're dealing with, which is certainly relevant today. And then, for a bit of context, this is the work of Rubens, from around 100 years earlier. This is Rubens' Saturn devouring his children, right? It's kind of a gory image, but it's nowhere near as dark and gripping as that of Goya. So Rubens, as a master painter, tackles all of the main subjects. This is mythology, this is classic history painting, kind of the meat and potatoes of painting in general. Rubens and a lot of other painters tackle the same things. Goya's is just arguably more gruesome in his approach, right? As you can see. So that is, as it loads up, clarifies, that is Francisco de Goya, the greatest of the Spanish painters, possibly, in the running with Velázquez and Picasso.